Hey everyone, this past Christmas I made each of my kiddos a custom laptop sleeve for their devices and they loved it. And so I thought, why not share it with all of you? So that's what we're gonna make today. So like I said, I made each of these for my kiddos and it turned out so great, and I decided I needed one for all of my devices. And so the pattern actually includes this laptop size as well as one for my Kindle and an iPad. So with 1 yard of quilted fabric, you actually will have enough to make all 3 of these sizes, and it's just super, super fun. So let me show you what you're gonna need to make this. Up first, you will need both your outside and lining fabrics, and I use these adorable prints from the Tim Holtz palette collection in orange. You'll also need either some batting or bosal foam. Both work, but I do really love the extra stability from the bosal. You'll need a little bit of Velcro and some fabric for your binding as well. So let's get started. All right, so up first, we're gonna quilt that fabric because we want our project to be quilted. And so like I mentioned earlier, if you want to make all 3 of these sizes, a yard of fabric will be more than enough for you if you just make that quilt sandwich with whatever you're gonna use for your outside on top, then your batting or bosal foam, and your lining fabric as well. I went ahead and I have cut this to size for the medium size, which is for the iPad, but let me tell you the sizes for each of them. So if you want to make the small, you need to cut a 6.5 by 19 inch rectangle. For this medium, you need 9.5 by 25 inches. And for the large, you need 11.5 by 33. And so like I said, I have the medium cut and ready to go. So let's go ahead and get started. So now that I have this cut to size, we need to decide which is gonna be the inside and the outside. Of course, I love this little mushroom print, so I'm gonna use it for the outside again on mine. And so now the first step is to take our binding. You wanna have this ready to go for the project, and we're just gonna cut a little piece that's gonna be big enough to do one short side. And I'm gonna bind this entire thing on the machine. And so I'm just gonna cut this little piece here. So if you've never made binding before, this is just a 2.5 inch strip by the width of fabric. You do not need to cut it on the bias for this particular project. And so I have just cut it at 2.5 inches and folded it wrong sides together down the middle. And you can sew each of those links together for as much as you need. And so this first little piece, we're just gonna line this up on the end and we're gonna sew it with a 1/4 inch seam to begin with. So let's go ahead and take this over here to the sewing machine, and I'm just kind of floating this over my project so that I can trim it off at the end. All right. So now it looks like this. I'm gonna go ahead and take this over to the ironing board. And we are gonna start by pressing this back and rolling it back. So we have a nice clean line. And then I'm gonna go ahead and fold this over and press it again, just to try and get it to lay as flat as possible. And if you have some clips, you could absolutely use a few of those to hold this in place. Beautiful. Really, all I want to make sure, since this is going to be on the inside of my project, is that I'm going to have plenty of fabric behind here so that when I come back, I'm going to stitch right where my 2 fabrics meet. And I want to make sure that I can catch that back fabric so it will secure that end. So let's go ahead and take this to the machine, and I'm gonna stitch right in the ditch of those 2 fabrics. If you want to stop for a moment, make sure you've caught it. I've got plenty of fabric there, no issues. So we're gonna keep going. right. So that first little step is all done. And so now I could just use my scissors, trim this off even with the sides of my rectangle, just like so. And let me grab a ruler here. Where did I put it? There we go. Because up next, we need to add our Velcro. And so I'm gonna measure down 1 inch from the bound edge that we just added. And I'm gonna take 1/2 of my Velcro. I've cut this at 4 inches for this size. And I'm just gonna float this in the middle here and make sure that we're about the same distance. Looks like it needs to be about 2 3/4 inches in on both sides and 1 inch down from the top. And so then I'm gonna grab a pin and I'm gonna pin this in place. There we go. Make it nice and secure. And then now we're gonna stitch just as close to that outside edge, about 1/8 of an inch, all the way around the rectangle that we've cut of our Velcro. And once I have one line of stitches, I'll pull that pin out of the way because we don't want to stitch over that. And for this one, I should mention, you want this side of the Velcro to be on the outside fabric that you chose. As I get to that corner, I've left my needle down, so then I can just pick this up and turn it and pivot under the machine. And I'll do that at each of the 4 corners until I've secured my Velcro in place. And the last little bit. Make sure to backstitch. There we go. So now the first half of our Velcro is attached, and so now we're gonna flip this around to the opposite end on the inside fabric. And so just like we did before, I'm gonna measure down 1 inch from the top, and we are going to center this up right there in the middle. And so we'll put a pin in there again to hold it in place. And then I'm gonna go ahead and stitch around this in the exact same way, and I'll meet you back here when it's done. All right, so now we have attached both pieces of our Velcro and it's ready to go. And so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna trim the corners of our top flap. And the way to remember that is it's the piece that we have not bound yet. And so for this medium size, we're going to measure in from the outside corners 1.5 inches on the top and along the side and make a mark. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm just gonna use this little Sharpie and just make sure that it's not so big that you will see it after you add the binding. So there's the first one, and then 1.5 inches down here for the second. And I'll do the same on this other side. Beautiful. So I've got my little marks there. And so now I can take my rotary cutter or scissors, and you can either draw a line and cut with your scissors from here, or you can use your ruler and rotary cutter to trim off those corners. So I'm just lining my ruler up on those 2 marks that I made and cutting this away. There we go. So now the next step is we're going to fold this over and we are going to line up our Velcro so that it matches. And then I will make sure that this is laying all nicely. And I'm gonna grab my pins and I'm gonna put a few pins to secure this on both sides. So just to show you guys, I've just kind of slid this, so I've got just a little bit of overlap with this flap, and this is gonna match up beautifully. There's really no exact measurement. As long as your Velcro is matching, it's all gonna work out in the end. So maybe you want your device to peek out a little bit more. You could actually spin it down more. I like it to be fully enclosed, so I prefer to have it there. And so as long as your Velcro matches, that's the measurement you're looking for. And so once you have this pinned in place, we're gonna do a basting stitch. So I'm gonna lengthen my stitch length, and we're gonna stitch a very scant 1/4 inch just to secure these sides in place. So let's go ahead and take this to the machine, and I'm just gonna baste where they are folded over. There's one side, and we'll flip this around and do the same thing on the other side with that scant 1/4 inch and our wide basting stitch. Okay, and now before I forget, I'm gonna turn my stitch length back to what I like it for regular stitching. And so now I have this secured in place. I can remove these pins, and I don't have to worry about fighting with this when I go to add the binding. And so we're gonna use the rest of the binding that we have ready to go. I'm gonna take this over to the ironing board, and the first thing we're gonna do is we are going to turn under, make sure you guys can see, about 1/2 inch. So the raw edge of this is tucked inside. And then I'll press that back in half, just like so. And then once I have that all tucked in, we can line this up with the edge of our project. And so I'm gonna put that bottom edge right in line with the bottom of my little sleeve. And we'll put a few pins in here, or clips if you have them, to secure it. I don't really use a lot of pins, but do whatever is comfortable for you. And then we're gonna just take this to the machine, and I will show you how to do each of these corners. But just before we get too far, you're gonna wanna leave about 6 inches here before we finish off this other edge. So even if you make it all the way around, make sure you stop when you get to this point. So let's take it to the machine. All right, so now we're gonna do that full 1/4 inch with our regular stitch length, and that should catch that basting stitch that we did initially inside this wider seam. You do want to back stitch at this first little bit, and just remove those pins as you go. So as I'm approaching this first little corner, I am going to actually kind of put my finger or a pin right at this corner and then stop before I get to that point. So I'm going to put my needle here at the end. So let's just hold this as a guide for me as I'm approaching the needle. And so then I'm actually just going to back stitch 1 stitch and trim my thread. And then now I can fold this back. And if I've done it correctly, it should line up exactly with that angle that I've cut. So you can see that there. And then I'm going to fold this over again. And so now I can start stitching right where those fabrics meet, that same 1/4 inch. Go ahead and back stitch again to secure that in place. And I'll show you again when I get to this next corner. So I'm going to line up, here's my corner. Use this as a guide so I know where to stop. Trim my thread, fold this back and over again, and continue on. And so I'm going to go ahead and finish stitching until I get to that stopping point about 6 inches from the edge, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so here we are. We have made it most of the way around our project. I've left about 6 inches from the end. And so now I'm going to lay my binding just past the edge. I'm going to use my ruler and I'm going to give myself a 1/2 inch past that bottom edge. So just keeping this straight, trimming that off. And so then now we can take this over to the ironing board again, just like we did at the beginning, and we'll carefully fold down that 1/2 inch. I'm just eyeballing. I've done this a few times, but feel free to measure. Press that in half. And then now this should match up with the bottom edge of our project, and we can finish stitching, back stitching there at the start and the end. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so now we have our binding sewn all the way around, and so now we can take this over to our ironing board and we're just going to press all of this back, just like so. And you can see here on those corners, because of the method we used, it kind of automatically miters them and they look so nice. They turn out beautifully. So we'll just press those back all the way around. And then we'll start rolling it over so we can secure this. Now, because we have more bulk on this, this is a little bit thicker. And so I really like to use binding clips for this part. So I'm going to go ahead and grab those and I'll meet you right back here. Okay, so I have my binding clips ready to go. And so I'm just going to roll this back. And if you want to trim away any of these threads so they're not poking out of the bottom, this is a great time to do it. And we are just going to tuck this in, making sure that we catch all of that seam in our binding and put a clip. And so then I'm just going to make my way around this whole project and put my clips every few inches. And I do want to show you when I get to these corners again, the best way to prepare. And so just like we did before, I'm going to kind of take this straight out and then we're going to fold this. It kind of automatically gives us a little fold here. We're going to fold this over and it continues that mitered corner and it looks just absolutely beautiful. And so that's what we're looking for. So I'll put a clip right there to hold that so it doesn't move. Then we'll do the same thing here. I've got lots of threads today, don't I? Just clip some of those out of the way. So I've folded this straight and then let me make sure I can get it laying smoothly. That's going to tuck in there. And we've got a nice mitered corner. Make sure my fabric's not tucked. There we go. And we'll clip that in place. All right, I'm going to finish this up and take it to the sewing machine and I'll meet you back here when it's all done. Okay, we are all done. We have attached our binding all the way around. I did use a stiletto at the very end to just hold that binding all the way over so I could get all the way to the edge, and it worked perfect. There is our cute little case. So now we have a matching set in all 3 sizes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial for these cases for all of your devices, and I'll see you next time on At Home. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching At Home. We're so excited to be almost 1 million quilters strong here at Missouri Star. And so if you haven't already joined our family, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can be notified of all of our future tutorials, and we'll see you soon.